guys, welcome to this session on Introduction to Competitive Programming hosted by Codechef IEMK Chapter. We have with us Priyansh Agarwal, who will be the speaker for today's session. A bit of introduction about Priyansh. He is rated 6-star on Codechef. He is also a candidate master on Codeforces, and he's an incoming intern at Goldman Sachs. So Priyansh, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Girish. Okay, so I just wanted to, first of all, know how many people here are from first year, second year, and then third year. Like, are mostly people here from second years, or how exactly is it? Okay, first year. Cool. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly present my screen. I've prepared some slides that I will be talking about, and let me just present my screen. And yeah, during the session, if any of you have any doubts, what you can do is you can maybe write down in the chat, or you guys are free to unmute as well. But I would prefer if you just write it in the chat, and I can take up these doubts whenever I feel like. Cool. So I'll just present my screen now. Okay, so maybe one of you can tell me if the screen is visible or not. Just write it in the chat.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yes, it's clearly visible.
Okay, cool. So yeah, let me just make it full screen. Yeah. So in this whole session, these are the certain things that I will be talking about. First of all, I'll be talking about competitive programming. I mostly am familiar with competitive programming. I am not really familiar with development. So I wouldn't be talking about software development per se. And yeah, I would also be talking about my Goldman Sachs interview experience. So maybe you guys can learn something from it. And also, I just wanted to know whether you guys are, what are you guys comfortable in, Hindi or maybe English, or just a combination of both? Maybe you can, write it in the chat only. Both. Okay. English. Cool. Okay. So yeah, let's just, begin with this whole session. First of all, since a lot of you are here from first year and second year, I'm assuming that you don't know much about competitive programming. So yeah, let's just discuss what exactly is competitive programming first of all. So competitive programming is a mind sport, and if you talk about it, you can compare it to chess. So like in chess, you have a certain position, and you need to find out the best move in order to actually win the game. Here in competitive programming, you need to do the exact same things, but instead you need to write code. Okay, so you need to solve problems, and these problems have to be solved efficiently. So let me just give you a quick example here. Let's say I tell you to sum up the first n natural numbers. So what would be your technique of doing this? You can maybe, you guys can write it in the chat. So there are two ways of actually doing it. You can either use the formula n into n plus 1 by 2. That would be just a very simple thing. The other thing that you can do is, you can run a for loop. Like for the ones that are familiar with a little bit of programming, you can run a for loop from 1 to n and keep summing up all these elements. Okay. So if you talk about it, this approach of running a for loop and summing up all these n elements, it seems really intuitive at the very first, instance. Like, it just clearly tells you that you're adding 1, you're adding 2, then so on, you're adding up till n, right? But if you look at this formula, which is n into n plus 1 by 2, does it seem intuitive that it would result, it would give you the right result? For the person who, let's say doesn't know anything about this formula, this wouldn't seem that intuitive, right? So that is exactly what happens here. There might be certain approaches that would not seem really intuitive on the very first go, but they might be really efficient. So if you talk about the efficiency here, this formula n into n plus 1 by 2, this is really very efficient, right? All you're doing is just you're multiplying two numbers and just dividing them by 2. And comparing it to the other approach of running a for loop, that is not at all efficient. It although seems intuitive, but it is not efficient. So can somebody tell me the time complexities of both these approaches? N into n plus 1 by 2 and running a for loop. Like, I just want to know how much exactly do you guys know here? Okay, order of 1 for n into n plus 1 by 2, right? And order of n for the part where we're running a for loop. Right, cool. So now tell me, which one is a better approach? The first one is a better approach, right? N into n plus 1 by 2. So that is exactly what we do in competitive programming. We are given with a problem. We come up with certain approaches and we decide which approach is the best here. And I mean, we just code up the best approach. So what exactly do you need to do here is you have to, first of all, be familiar with the programming language, because only then will you be able to code, right? If you don't know any programming language, how good is that logic? Like knowing n into n plus 1 by 2 is a great logic. But if you don't have the means to actually code it up, there is no need of it, right? So yeah, I mean, all you have to do is you have to first of all be familiar with the programming language, come up with an approach and just code it up, right? So this is exactly what competitive programming is. So in case you guys have any doubts about this, you can let me know. Okay, cool. So assuming that there are no doubts here, let's move to the next slide. And the next slide is the motivation behind doing competitive programming. So first of all, if you look at it, you can consider it like a hobby. That would be a great motivation here. But I mean, for most of the people here who are in colleges, they don't consider things like competitive programming as hobbies, right? Because if you look at competitive programming and just do it solely considering it as a hobby, what will happen is that you would not be gaining much here. You would be just doing it and considering it like a hobby. But if you look at the other side, it is actually improving your problem solving abilities. Okay, so how exactly is it improving your problem solving abilities? You're given the problem, you need to come up with approaches, and you need to figure out which is the best approach, which will be the most optimal approach. So this is exactly what problem solving is, right? So that is the main motivation behind doing CP. Your problem solving abilities would be really good. And how are these problem solving abilities actually helpful? So what happens is that during technical interviews, you're given with certain problems, and these problems may be involving data structures and algorithms. But let's say I give you a problem that also involves data structures and algorithms, but has a lot of problem solving involved, right? I mean, there are two types of questions that actually come up with data structures and algorithms. There might be a very standard question that you might have already done on lead code or GFG somewhere, but there might be a question which requires some certain thinking, which might be a new question. So if you're already doing competitive programming from a very long time, doing new problems and coming up with better and efficient approaches during an interview would not be such a heavy task that time. So that is another motivation for doing CP. And yeah, I mean, what I can discuss right now is that I can just tell you an overall path that you can follow so that you can get good at CP. So in case you guys have any doubts in the first two slides, you can let me know. Okay, so I think Amir is asking a question. I'm not able to do DSA questions, what to do? So what we will be doing here is that we'll be taking these type of questions at the very end, because if I get into these questions, that would just just a minute. Okay, so I think there are no more questions around this. So I can just quickly discuss an overall path that you can follow to get good at CP. Okay. So the very first thing that you need to do is you need to learn a programming language. And now the very important question that comes up is which programming language should we choose? So in my opinion, there are these three major languages that you can choose. I mean, you can choose any of them, and I wouldn't recommend choosing any other languages apart from these three. And what are these three languages? These three are C++, Java, and Python. So if you're doing C++, or let's say if you're doing Python already, I wouldn't recommend you to actually go on to start with C++ and or Java. But if you're already doing C++ and Java, I mean, you're good to go, because C++ is actually considered to be the best language in CP. Okay, and why exactly is it? Because the runtime that C++ has is much faster compared to Python and Java. So that is why most people prefer doing CP in C++. Right. So let's say you're already done with a programming language. Now, what do you need to do? So are you guys familiar with this concept of data structures and algorithms? Like a quick yes or no, you can write it in the chat. Okay, yes. little bit, right? So this data structures and algorithms is nothing but, they are providing you with certain techniques, certain inbuilt things. I mean, I wouldn't say inbuilt, because there are certain data structures that you need to implement from scratch. But let's just say that there are certain things, there are certain libraries that you have, and using them, you can write more efficient code in terms of both time and space, right? So what happens is that once you're done with the programming language, you can get into problem solving right away. But there is another way by which you can approach this whole scenario. What you can do is, after learning a programming language, you can learn these data structures and algorithms. And for competitive programming particularly, I wouldn't suggest you to learn data structures like linked lists, binary search trees, and what else are there, binary trees. These are certain data structures that are never used in CP, but they're very important from DSA's point of view. So what you can do is, you can figure out what are the important data structures that are used. For example, I mean, mostly these data structures that come up, they come up at a very later stage in CP. If you're not good with problem solving, knowing a lot of DSAs won't actually help you. Okay, so for CP particularly, data structures like segment trees, Fenwick trees, these are very important. But if you talk about interviews, they're not so much important. And if you talk about becoming a really good competitive programming, like a programmer, like a candidate master or a 6-star, you need to actually be familiar with these concepts. Okay. So what you can do is, after learning a programming language, you can get into problem solving, and along the way, you can learn certain data structures that you need. Okay, don't learn linked lists, BSTs, all these. And I mean, even if you're approaching CP from an interview's point of view, you can learn these data structures at the very end. Okay, these linked lists, BSTs, they hardly take up 5 or 6 days to actually master them, right? So let's say now you're done with the programming language, you're actually giving contests on certain websites. Now what do you need to do? Okay, you might be giving a lot of contests, you might be not performing that well. Why? Because you're just starting out, right? You won't be performing that well in the just starting phase. Now what do you need to do? So let's say you've given a contest, let's say you've given Div 2 contest on Codeforces, and you were able to solve 3 problems. Let's say out of 5 problems, you're able to solve 3 problems. What would you do after the contest? You would upsolve the 4th problem. Why? Because the 3 problems, I mean, you have a certain level in CP, okay? So let's say your level is of doing 3 problems in a contest. So how will your level improve if you're not actually, trying out that 4th problem after the contest, right? So this whole thing is called upsolving, and I usually recommend people to upsolve a lot. Like, if you're giving a contest, don't just leave it after a contest. I mean, don't just leave it after attempting it. You need to upsolve it, right? And if I talk about my overall journey has been like this. I learned a programming language. I went for Codeforces, Codechef, HackerRank. I started doing problems on these online judges. And after, I would say, 3 or 4 months, I took a paid course. I mean, I wouldn't, really talk about that paid course here, but I took a paid course. And you can do a paid course, you can do a free course, you can watch YouTube videos, you can do anything you want. All that is required is that, after doing that whole particular course, or, watching that whole playlist on YouTube, you should be familiar with certain concepts, like, I would say, prefix sums, difference arrays, some greedy techniques. And I mean, that is all you need to know before you actually, jump into giving contests. So yeah, I mean, if you talk about this overall roadmap, that is how it is going to be. Most of it would be like practice, keep up solving, learn new techniques. And I mean, just read the editorial. If you see that there is a certain technique that you don't know about, you need to learn about it, right? So I mean, we can take up doubts related to competitive programming before we actually jump into my overall interview experience at Goldman Sachs. So I think now would be a good time to discuss doubts. So yeah, I mean, you guys are free to write here. Okay. I've really experienced that whenever I solve problems using Python, I always get TLE error. Okay. So like I said, C++ and Java are faster than Python, and C++ is even faster than Java. So if you've been doing Python from a very long time, I wouldn't suggest you to switch to C++ or Java. But let's say you've only spent around 1 or 2 months in Python, I would suggest you to switch to C++. What DSA topics? Yeah. Was somebody speaking something? Okay. No issues. What DSA topics is essential for CP? So, in the very initial stage, there are no DSAs that are actually important. But once you get to a level where, your rating is something like 1500, 1600 on Codeforces, you need to learn data structures like segment trees, Fenwick trees, sparse tables, and what else? You need to be familiar with graphs. You need to be good with graphs. You need to be good with dynamic programming. Sir, what is a TLE error? Okay, so let me just quickly explain what is a TLE. So like I said, like we were discussing the very first problem of finding the sum of first n natural numbers. So let's say I give you the value of n to be something like 1 billion. Okay, so what would you be doing if you follow the second approach? You would be running a for loop for 1 billion items, right? And this would be just too time consuming. So writing a code that is very time consuming actually results in a TLE, and it stands for time limit exceeded. Okay. How important is peer coding important to you? Okay, this is a very important question. I would like to take up this question particularly. How important is peer coding? Okay. So if you look at any sport, if you look at any activity that you're doing, if you're doing it alone, you wouldn't be actually, gaining a lot. So let's just assume that, you're playing, let's say football, you're playing football and, you're playing alone. Okay, so what all can you do? You can just kick the ball. You cannot pass it to somebody else. You can just kick the ball. You can just kick it in the goal again and again, again and again, right? But let's say there are two people who are playing football. They can do more activities, right? So this is important for every activity that you do, mostly. So peer coding is important because, let's say you're stuck on an error in CP. So where would you go exactly? You can search on Google how to resolve this, or you can search on YouTube for a video where they tell you how to resolve that particular error. Or you can just ask the peer that you're coding with, like, can you help me with this? Right. So that is something where peer coding really helps. Another part is that, it actually motivates you. So let's say you're giving a contest and you see that, you've only solved 2 problems, but let's say your friend has solved 3 problems. So at that moment, you would also get motivated to try out the third problem. You wouldn't leave the contest then and there, right? And I mean, it is common for practicing as well. Like if you're practicing a lot and the other person, the other friend that you have, he's not practicing, he would look at your rating graph or the number of problems that you solved, and he would get motivated again. So that is how peer coding is really important. Okay. Can you tell please which course? Okay, we're not discussing that right now. What is the ideal approach of solving problems in short contests? Ideal approach of solving problems. Okay. So first of all, there is no particular ideal approach of actually solving a problem. There are certain steps that you can take in a very general sense. So first of all, you read a problem. You read the problem statement once. If you're able to understand the whole problem, well and good. But if you're not able to understand this whole problem, read it again. Okay. And after you understood the problem, you need to actually look at the constraints. So the constraints in competitive programming are really very important. You can solve a problem, and if you've not looked at the constraints, you would ideally be coming up, with a very inefficient solution, and that wouldn't be really good, right? So you need to first of all look at the constraints and decide that what algorithm would suit me, like what algorithm would work here, what would result in a TLE, or what would result in a memory limit exceeded, let's say. Right. So you look at the constraints and you decide that, what type of a time complexity would be fine, what type of a space complexity would be fine here. Right. Now, what do you do after that? You look at the sample input. Right. You look at these sample test cases and decide how are these inputs, forming up these outputs. And after that, it is mostly about, thinking. Like if you've learned, let's say 5 data structures, you need to think which data structure should I involve here, or if there is any need of using a data structure or not here. Right. Okay. So let's see, I can just take up 2 more doubts and then we can, maybe discuss my Goldman Sachs interview experience. And after that, we can take up more doubts. Okay. So let me see if I have some interesting doubts here. should we learn DSA first or start CP or should we learn DSA first, then start CP, or go with both simultaneously? Right. So this is a fine question. If you talk about my whole journey, I took the second way. I just went into problem solving right away, and I was learning data structures and algorithms along the way. Right. And you can do it the other way around as well, but I will tell you what is the main issue in doing it the other way around. Okay. So if you talk about competitive programming particularly, you would not be encountering things like linked lists, BSTs, heaps also. I mean, there are inbuilt things like priority queues, you can use them. So I don't think these data structures, which they actually teach you in the beginning phase, they're actually used in competitive programming, right? So if you take up this first approach of actually learning the data structures first and then getting into CP, you would ideally be learning a lot of stuff that would never be used in CP, right? Things that would be used in CP would be like segment trees, Fenwick trees. But if you talk about all these DSA courses, they never teach you segment trees, they never teach you Fenwick trees. All they teach you is linked lists, BSTs, heaps, but you would never be using them, right? So why not take the second approach, get into problem solving right away. And while you're at it, just see which data structure do you need here. And if you don't know about it, just learn that. Okay, let's take up one more question and then we can discuss about my Goldman Sachs interview experience. Is there any book that you would suggest? I wouldn't recommend any books for competitive programming, YouTube videos. There is a website called CP Algorithms. Let me just write it here. So there is this website called CP Algorithms that you guys can refer to. This is a great website. This is mostly like a book only, but it is not a literal book. Okay. When we are stuck in a question of a short contest for more than 1 hour, should we jump to the next one? Okay, this depends upon your level. Okay, if you talk about me, if I'm stuck on the first A problem for around 20 minutes, I would jump to the B problem. But if your level is something like, you're not able to solve B problem in most of the contests, I wouldn't recommend jumping onto the B problem. So this is similar to, my case. If I'm solving the D problem and I'm not able to solve the D problem, I wouldn't jump to the E problem. Why? Because my level is just solving the first 4 problems and very rarely solving the 5th problem as well. Right. So you need to consider your own level and decide whether jumping would actually help me or not. Okay, this is an interesting question. This is the last question that we'll be taking up right now. So the question is, after a certain level, there is a saturation. And how do you break out of the saturation so that your graph keeps rising? Cool. So first of all, I'd like to show you my graph, for instance, for this. Just a minute. So I hope Codeforces is visible to all of you right now. Maybe one of you can write yes or no in the chat if it is visible or not. Okay, cool. So can you look at this graph? Can somebody point out where exactly is the saturation here?
At the beginning level.
At the beginning level, okay. So at the beginning level, can you tell me exactly in terms of the number of months? Like if you look at it, October to April, would you say October to April or October to January?
October to January.
Okay, this is a saturation according to you. But what about this part? January to July. January 2021 to July 2021. What would you call this? Is this saturation or what exactly is it?
Not saturation, sir.
Okay. But actually, I mean, I would like to correct you here. This the phase from October to January is not a saturation here, but in fact, the phase from January to July is a saturation. So I'll tell you what exactly is a saturation. Okay. So a phase of saturation just means that you're stuck at a particular rating for a very long time. So can you look at this? I'm stuck in this range of 1900 to 2000 for a very huge amount of time, from January to July. In fact, if you look at it, I reached candidate master in October, and I'm still almost at that same rating after, I would say around 7 or 8 months. Right. So this is exactly what saturation means here. And now I would tell you how exactly do you need to break out of the saturation. Now you want, I mean, you would tell me that, you know, if you already know how to break out of the saturation, why exactly is your rating not going up, right? So yeah, I mean, that is an irony here. But what I can say is that for most of the parts where your saturation is not at a very you know, later phase, something like a candidate master or an expert, all you need to do is, you know, you need to solve problems of rating plus 200. Let's say your rating is 1900, you need to solve problems of rating 2100. Okay. And now exactly, I'll tell you here why my whole rating graph is saturated here. So can you see the problems that I've actually solved? This whole region. So what happens here is that my rating is 1900, 2000. But if you look at the number of problems that I solved in the rating range of 2100, 2200, these are very less. Okay. These are very, very less compared to the number of problems that I've solved in 1700, 1800, or 1900. Right. So I know my reason why exactly am I not improving. I'm not able to give such a lot of time to solve problems of rating 2100, 2200, 2300. I mean, it is just because of the fact that these problems are really very difficult and they require a lot of time. And I personally don't have a lot of time at this phase right now. Right. So that is one reason why my graph is saturated. So I think the person who asked this doubt, is this clear to you? All you need to do is you need to solve problems of rating
Yes,
plus
yes.
100. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, let's just discuss doubts after one more slide that I have. And after that, we can, you know, start with more doubts. So here I'd like to, you know, talk about my Goldman Sachs interview experience. And how exactly was it? It was first of all an on-campus opportunity. Goldman Sachs came to IIIT Delhi for hiring interns and as well as for hiring, you know, guys for full time. So what happened? There was first of all there was a coding test, and I will tell you exactly how this coding test was. It was a little different from coding tests in companies like Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. So in companies like Goldman Sachs or Tower Research or all these fintech companies that are out there, they usually focus a lot on your aptitude. Okay. So even if you're not that good with programming, if your aptitude is really very good, you should be able to get through. Right. So in my first whole coding test, there were, I would say, I think 4 or 5 sections. One of the section was on aptitude overall. It was like 20 minutes and you had to solve 8 or 10 problems, I guess. And these problems were really difficult. Okay. These problems were something like JEE advanced level. Right. So this is the level of aptitude that they actually expect from you guys in fintech companies. And apart from that, there were 2 coding sections. The problems in the coding section were, I wouldn't say they were very difficult compared to the aptitude test that they had conducted. And what exactly was there? There was, you know, there was one more section which was covering CS core fundamentals. And what exactly is are these CS fundamentals? They usually cover topics like OS, DBMS, and computer networks, and OOPS. Right. And then there was a last section on HR. So what was this HR section? There were 2 questions, 2 behavioral questions, and you just had to write what exactly do you feel about these questions. Okay, so there was nothing like a right answer or a wrong answer. You can write whatever you want, but it should just make sense. Right. So this is about my overall coding test experience. And if you guys have any doubts about this, you can let me know. How did you prepare for APTI? Okay, that's a good question. So what I did was there is a website called indiabix.com. Let me just write it here. So there is this website called indiabix.com. Okay, I think I've messaged somebody here. Let me just write it in every. Right. So for preparing aptitude, you can refer to this website indiabix.com. And apart from that, you can, you know, refer to this whole aptitude section on Geeks for Geeks. I think it is a very good section. And I had mostly prepared from Geeks for Geeks only, and I was practicing on indiabix.com. How much it would take to prepare for aptitude? I mean, what exactly is the measure here? How much time, how much efforts, what exactly are you talking about? How much time? Okay. So I think not a lot of time. If you do aptitude for around 20 days thoroughly, that should be fine. Does all FANG ask this level of aptitude? No. Most of the FANG companies don't even have a section for aptitude. This is for companies, you know, which are fintech. Companies like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, and Codenation as well, Tower Research. So all these companies, they pay really well. I mean, yeah, they do expect that you have a good aptitude. What is fintech? Fintech is like it is just a combination of finance plus tech. So that is what fintech is. Okay, so yeah, I think we're done with the first coding round. Let's discuss about the interviews. Okay, so I basically had 3 interviews for Goldman Sachs. There were people who had 4 rounds. There were people who had 2 rounds. Okay, I think there is one more doubt here. What will be expected from you as an intern? Okay, I don't have any idea about this because I haven't done the internship. I've just grabbed an offer right now. Okay, so let's not discuss that first of all. So where was I? I was discussing about my overall interview experience, right? So I had 3 rounds of interviews, and I think my overall interviews were pretty smooth compared to what people usually have in Goldman Sachs. Like I've talked to some of my friends, they didn't have such a smooth experience. But yeah, I think it is a little about luck as well, the type of interview that you're getting, the type of questions that they ask you. So yeah, I mean, if you talk about this whole placement internship thing, all these things are pretty random. Okay, so this is for mostly good people. If you're not getting through in the first 2 or first 3 companies that, let's say, visit your campus, don't get disheartened. Okay, and if you talk about my overall journey, I also got rejected in the first, I would say, 3 companies that came at IIIT Delhi, and GS was the company that I got into, and it was the 4th company. Right. So let me just talk about my overall interviews that I had for Goldman Sachs. The first interview was basically about DSA, and the questions were very easy. I mean, one of the question was you need to just find out the intersection point of 2 linked lists. So if any of you here would have done even a little bit of DSA, this is very easy. Okay. And like I said, for topics like linked lists, BSTs, binary trees, 5 or 10 days at the very end is more than enough. Okay. Right. So this was one question. Then there was a question on stacks and queues, and I would say it was a medium level question. It was not that easy compared to the first question. And yeah, I mean, if you guys want me to tell you the question was about finding the minimum in a stack such that there are only insertions. There are no deletions in the stack. There are only insertions, and you need to find the minimum element at every point. Now the condition here was that you cannot use any extra space. So if anybody here would like to discuss what is the approach that would actually solve this, I mean, you're more than welcome to do that.
Iterator.
Okay, just give me a minute. Okay, just give me a minute. Let me just mute myself. Right, yeah. What were you saying? Iterator. For the person who was speaking, you can unmute and speak.
Using iterator and
using iterator. Okay, so let's say I give you a stack, and there are already 10 elements in it, and you need to find out the minimum element. So in that case, you can use an iterator. You can pop out every element from the stack and find out the minimum overall. That can be a fine approach. But let's say I tell you that there are no elements initially. You insert the first element, you have to keep track of the minimum. You insert the second element, you have to keep track of the minimum. You have to insert the third element, you have to keep track of the minimum, and so on. But the condition here is that while you're storing this minimum, you cannot use any extra space. You cannot even use a variable. So how exactly would you do that? You just have one stack. You don't have any extra variables. All you know is that there is an element coming in, and you need to keep track of the minimum. You cannot use any extra space. You only have a stack. I think we can think for 1 minute. If you guys don't come up with any approach, I can tell you my approach. Can we take a minimum variable and check at each input? Right. Like I said, you cannot even use a variable. How would you do that?
Can we do one thing? Like if the stack is already empty, then we'll push the element in the stack, and then when we'll push into the stack, then we'll check the top of the stack and that compare that number with the top of the stack, and if the number is greater, then we will simply push the number again and again until we find the lesser number.
Okay, that's a fine approach. I think that is the overall approach, but let me just tell you how exactly this is solved. So just give me a minute. So I hope OneNote is visible to all of you. So this is a stack. Initially it is empty, okay? What you can do is, first of all, since you are actually concerned about finding the minimum element, you can first of all insert infinity into it. Okay. You cannot use any variables, but you can use the stack like you want, but you cannot use any extra space, okay? So let's say I insert infinity here. Now the first element that comes up is x. So what you do is you compare x and infinity and you just insert x here. Just a minute. So you just compare infinity and x. Now, obviously, x would be smaller than infinity, right? So what you will do is you'll pop out this infinity, you'll insert x here. And after inserting x, you will also insert your current minimum. What is your current minimum now?
X.
Right. So after you've got your x, your stack will look something like this. You would have two x's here. Now let's say another element comes and it is y. Now let's say the condition is that x is again greater than y. So what you'll do is you'll compare these two. You will see that y is the new minimum. So what you'll do is you'll pop out this x, you'll insert y, and you'll insert another y. But now let's say a z comes here. So, and the condition is that let's say z is greater than y. So what you will do is you will compare z and y. What you will see is your z is not the new minimum, right? So you'll again pop this y, you will insert z, and now you'll insert a y again, because y is your current minimum, right? So in this way, you're actually storing your current minimum on the top of the stack every time. So every time you have to compare it, you just have to pop one element from the stack and compare it and again push it into the stack. So this way, you're not using any extra variables. You said that you're not allowed to remove any. Okay, so the thing is that we are actually allowed to remove elements, but the question is something like you only have queries of inserting elements. There would be no queries of removing elements. There would be queries of only inserting elements, right? So yeah, I think this question should be clear now. So this was an interesting question. I took up some amount of time to come up with this approach. I don't think it is totally trivial to come up with this. But yeah, this was about my overall first interview. So let's discuss about my second interview. And in my second interview, it was less of DSA. It was more about object-oriented programming. Okay. So I would highly recommend that if you're appearing for technical interviews, do prepare object-oriented programming much before than operating systems or DBMS. I think OOPS is much more important than OS and DBMS. Okay. It might be different for, it might be a little different for different companies, but mostly they do ask OOPS. Right. So in my second interview, they were mostly asking questions like, what is the difference between an abstract class or an interface? And where exactly would you use an abstract class? Where exactly would you use an interface? Right. And what else did they ask me? So they were asking questions like whether you can extend an interface or not, something like these. Right. So, there is not much to discuss in the second round. It was more about just, they were just giving me questions. I was coming up with answers. Then they were giving me follow-up questions.
So would you consider that a person who has knowledge of Java would have benefit in both CP as well as on OOPS rather than another person only?
Yeah. This is important. I think a person who has maybe been doing CP in Java would have been at a much better stage compared to me. Because if you talk about object-oriented programming and all these tutorials that are available online, most of them are in Java. And even in colleges, most of object-oriented programming is taught in Java. Like in my college as well, it was taught in Java. Right, but it is not like that, if you're not good with Java, you wouldn't be able to solve these questions. Because the thing is that all these concepts are similar in all the languages, just the implementation is different, right? But I think if I'm not wrong, in C++, there are no interfaces. What are your thoughts for the first years what should they be doing? I think first of all, you should be focusing on DSA and CP. If you have time, I mean, if you're talking about first years, I think they have a lot of time. I would highly recommend you to try out competitive programming, because at the end, when you will be giving interviews, it would be like a cakewalk. Like if you talk about my overall experience in these interviews, they were mostly like, they were giving me questions and I already almost knew the answer. I just had to, come up with brute force, then tell them, and then come up with the most optimal solution. But since I've been doing CP for a very long time, it was just like, they were giving me questions, and in the very, I would say in the next 30 or 30 seconds of 1 minute, I had the approach in my mind. Right. So that is where CP would definitely help you. Best websites for CP. I think Codeforces and Codechef maybe. Coder is also really good. So yeah, these were my first 2 rounds. Okay, let's discuss CP after my third. I mean, after I'm done explaining my third round of interview. So in my third round of interview, I would say it was more like a formality. Maybe they already knew that, I am good with DSA, I'm good with all these problem solving. So they were basically conducting it for just like a formality, more like an HR round. Right. So like I said, for GS, it is not fixed that they will have 4 rounds or they will have 5 rounds. They might have 2 rounds, they might have 3 rounds, depending upon your performance in the interviews. So let's say they decide that we'll conduct 2 rounds of interview for this person. But let's say in the second round, you don't perform that well. So they might give you another chance of, they might give you another interview as, as another chance. And similarly, if they decide that we'll be having 3 interviews for this person, and if you just, show your overall potential in the first 2 rounds only, and you perform really well, they might just skip the third round and just select you like that only. Right. So my third round was more like an HR round. They were just asking me questions like, how exactly would you, if we give you certain situations, how would you react to them? And there was one coding question again, but it was a very simple question on strings. Okay, yeah, I think I'm done with the overall part that I actually wanted to talk about. And in case you guys, want to follow me on my socials, these are my socials. And yeah, you can definitely check them out. Apart from that, I think we can take up questions now. And I think Girish, maybe you can, take up some questions from the form that we had asked them to fill. And after that, we can take up questions from the chat as well.
Yeah, sure. So we have one question which says, what's the optimum time to try to solve a problem? When to see the tutorial and when not to? I think you can take up this question.
Okay, sure. So talking about the optimal time that you should be spending on a question, it depends upon the level of the question. So let's say your level is of solving 1300 level problems, and you get a problem that is only 800 rated. So essentially only 10 minutes should be fine. If you are not able to come up with a solution in 10 minutes, you can maybe look at the tutorial and be just done with it, because that problem is not that important right now, right? But if you talk about problems, let's say that are 1600 rated, these are well above your level. So if you only spend the first 10 minutes or 20 minutes and then jump into the tutorial, you would not be gaining much here. So in this situation, if the problem that you're actually solving is rated higher than your current rating, I would recommend putting in around 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and you can even go up to an hour. Right. So I think that answers the question.
Yeah. So we have the next question: how to think about the approach instantly in a contest?
Okay, how to think about an approach instantly? I mean, again, it depends upon your level. Okay, if you talk about my level, if I look at problems of rating 800, 1000, 1200, or sometimes even 1400, I just come up with approaches instantly, right? But this might not be, that trivial for a person who is only 800 or 900 rated right now, right? So all you need to do is you need to improve your certain level, improve your level and put it to a certain, mark. And apart from that, there is just one recommendation that I have. If you consider the first 2 problems in a contest, mostly like A and B problems, they're very trivial. Okay, so even if you know segment trees, Fenway trees, and all these DP and all that stuff, you don't have to apply them in the first 2 problems. The first 2 problems will be very trivial. So just think about them, in something like, you've been given to just solve A plus B. These problems are like these. Okay, So the very first approach that comes to your mind, just try to see if this is failing somewhere. And if it is not, just code it up and submit it. Don't just think about it too much in the very first two problems.
Okay, I think that answers that question. We have a special request in one of the questions. It says, I have been doing DSA in Java and now I want to move to competitive programming, but everyone recommends me to switch to C++ before doing competitive. Please guide me what to do.
Okay, so the question is that you want to switch to C++. Is that the question?
He's asking that everyone is recommending to him to switch to C++, even though he has been doing Java for a long time.
Okay, that's a good question. What I would say is that if you've been already doing Java for a very long time, don't switch. This is for everybody. If you're doing Python or Java or any other programming language like JavaScript for a very long time, don't switch. But if it has been something like 1 or 2 months only, then I would recommend switching. And if you're already done with data structures and algorithms in Java, they're not very different from C++. Okay, so if you would have done them in Python, I might have suggested you to switch. But specifically for Java and C++ are very similar.
Div 2 A and B हो जाता है, C नहीं हो पाता.
Okay, so div 2 A and B हो जाता है, C नहीं होता. First of all, learn dynamic programming. Okay, this is for everybody. If you are at a level where you're able to solve the first two problems in a contest, there is one topic that you should be familiar with now, which is dynamic programming. If you don't know dynamic programming, there is no point in actually even going for the third problem. It is very likely that you wouldn't be able to solve it. Okay, so just first of all, learn dynamic programming. And apart from that, for solving C problems, I would recommend practicing problems of rating range 1600 to 1800.
Okay, so is the typing speed important during contest?
Okay, so the typing speed in the initial stage is not important. It is not at all important. Like if you talk about problems A and B, they don't really require you to code a lot of stuff. Okay, so at that point, typing speed is not very important. But if you talk about like, let's say you're already comfortable solving 3 problems in a contest and you want to go to the 4th and the 5th problem. So what happens is that all these problems which are very tough, they also require you to write a lot of code. Okay, so if your typing speed is not very good, if your implementation speed is not very good, what might happen is you might come up with an approach, but you would not be able to code it up before the contest actually ends. So once you're comfortable and you're already at a stage where your rating is something like 1600, 1700, I would recommend going for touch typing.
Okay, I think that was it. That were the questions from the form. So people in the audience, if you have any questions, you're most welcome to shoot it at Priyansh.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I can just pick up interesting questions from the chat, or maybe Girish, you can pick up questions and maybe you can ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, whatever works for you.
Yeah. So if you want, you can either write it in the chat box, or either you can just also unmute and speak up.
Yeah. That would be amazing. Like,
yeah.
Now, if you can speak up, that would be amazing.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, Priyansh. I wanted to ask that how do we deal with our down points in our graph?
Down points in a graph. Okay. So where exactly would you actually encounter a down point? The down point would come when you would be performing very, I would say, at a level which is much below than your actually current level, right? So that is the point where you would be getting a down point or a negative delta, I would say. Now, how would you deal with them, right? That is the question.
Yes.
So first of all, this is a recommendation. Don't get demotivated for just because of that one negative delta. You would be having a lot of negative deltas, across your journey. Don't get demotivated. And the next thing I would suggest is that, don't consider it that your level has decreased or, you are not performing well. It happens with everybody, okay? You might be having positive deltas. There would be a certain point where you would reach your saturation. You would be having ups and downs. There would be certain points where you would be having a lot of downs. all you need to do is don't think about it so much. Okay, don't open your Codeforces profile every now and then when you have a negative delta. If you have a positive delta, keep opening it again and again. Don't open it many times if you have a negative delta.
Okay.
How much should we focus on projects while doing these CP and DSE things?
Okay, that's a good question again. How much should you be focusing on projects? So the thing is, first of all, I'm not the right person to ask this question because in my overall journey, I haven't done a lot of development. I have mostly done competitive programming, making YouTube videos and all that stuff. So I think having 1 or 2 projects is definitely very important in your resume. It should not be like you're only doing DSA, you're only doing CP, you haven't made any projects. This just shows that you might be very good with problem solving, but if we assign you a task, you might not be able to do it. Which would be related to development, right? So it, depends upon your priorities. If you feel that you are really into development, you like project building, I would recommend make a lot of projects, make some major projects, and gives a little bit of time to DSA and CP. But if you are someone who's really into CP, who's really interested in problem solving, I would recommend keep doing problem solving, keep grinding. But while you're doing it, along the way, just make 1 or 2 mini projects. Okay, don't make very major projects. Just make up some mini projects that just show that you've done some development. So it totally depends upon your interest. Whichever interests you, you do that thing more, and you do the other thing a bit less.
What kind of project should we do as per the CP?
What kind of what?
What kind of project should we do if we doing the CP for a long time? What kind of project will be very fruitful for the for cracking the companies?
Okay, so the thing is that if you talk about cracking companies, it is not all about the idea. It is just about the fact that you have certain projects and you're able to explain them really well. Okay, so let's say you have a project that is, let's say, a Twitter clone, and you put it in your, you've made this whole project and you put it in your resume, and when the interviewer asks you, you're not able to explain it. Okay, so that wouldn't be a good sign. But even if you have somewhat like a mini project, something like you've designed 1 or 2 web pages and you've, let's say, done the authentication part, and you're able to explain that really well to an interviewer, that would give a very positive impact. So if you talk about picking up topics, just pick up any random topics. It does not really matter, but the thing that matters is that you're able to explain them. Okay, and if you've done a lot of competitive programming, I'm assuming that you've not done a lot of development. So in that case, don't go for a very major project that you have difficulty in explaining during the interview.
Sir, I have a question. Sir, how to become be consistent in DSA and CP? Actually, I couldn't be consistent in DSA. That's the problem. Okay,
so first of all, I would recommend if you talk about DSA, pick up any sheet, something like DSA, Love Bubber's DSA sheet or Striver sheet, anything. Okay, just pick up that sheet and start solving problems. And while you're solving problems, keep marking them, like this is done, this is done, this is done. What happens is that, let's say you've done the first 50 problems, when you will be approaching the 51st problem, it would be like you've already done 50 problems, so that overall motivation would come from within. Okay, so that is one thing that I would suggest. And apart from that, just make it a point that even if I'm not doing a lot of problem solving or DSA today, I will at least solve 1 or 2 problems. Okay, don't just leave it like I am taking a rest of something like 7 days and I'll get back to problem solving after that. Don't do that. Even if you're taking rest, even if you're not coding up the whole problem, just look at one question, think about it in your mind, and if you're done with it, just that should be enough for becoming consistent.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Hi, Priyansh. Like, I had a question. I don't know whether it would be suitable to ask it, but I just wanted to know that if a person gets an internship in a company, in a particular company, and he also gets a PPO after completing the internship, and after that, if he goes to doing internship in any other company in the next year or so, like he grabbed an internship in 2nd year last, and he grabbed another internship at the 3rd year last, and both are different companies, and from one he had already got a PPO. So if another company also offers a PPO, like is it valid or is it legitimate that we can switch, or like we have to sign like before if we are accepting an PPO and we have to sign an agreement kind of thing. So is it possible to switch the company if I'm finding that the work life balance is better in the next company or not?
Okay. So the question is that the thing is that if you have two offers, right? Can you reject one of them and can you pick up the other one, right? Even if you, let's say, signed the first one, right? So the thing is that even if you talk about all these companies, let's say we talk about Amazon. Let's say Amazon gives you an offer that you can come to our company. We are giving you a PPO, and let's say at the end, Amazon decides that we don't need so many people. We're fine with the number of people that we currently have. So what would Amazon do in that case? They would just totally tell you that we don't need you. Maybe you can try out some other time, right? This is what Amazon will do, right? They won't take you, right? Would they take you?
No,
They wouldn't take you, right? So I mean, as an individual, you should think for yourself, right? All these companies, they think for themselves. You should think for yourself. This is what I believe, that if you have an offer, if you have another offer, you should take that offer which is favorable for you. Okay. And even if you signed an offer, it is not binding. Okay. Once, even if let's say you signed off an offer that I will be joining, it is not binding by any means. Okay. So yeah, I mean, just look for yourself. If you feel that the second company is better, go for the second company.
Also, I would like to just interrupt here. We have a feedback form. People who would be filling this feedback form would also be getting the certificate. So guys, please do fill it in. We would really like to hear it from you. We have one question that I have been receiving on the form also. How to become specialist from pupil?
How to become specialist from people? Okay. Like I said, if you have to change your current title, let's say I'm a candidate master and I want to reach to a master. So the overall thing is that while you're giving contest, you would be able to solve problems that are of your current level or a bit higher, right? So if you're, let's say, something like 2000 rated, you're able to solve problems till 2200. But if you want to become a master, you need to, be solving more problems, or, maybe improve your speed. So there are two things that you can do at this point. Either you focus on your speed and, if you're only solving 3 problems, just focus on your speed and try to solve them really quickly so that your rank improves. Or you can put in some effort and try to, solve the 4th problem as well. Okay. So yeah, I mean, and talking about specifically going from pupil to specialist, I would recommend learning dynamic programming. And yeah, I mean, if you're familiar with dynamic programming, you should be able to solve the C problem as well in contests. So, and if you're able to solve C problems consistently, I think you should be able to, reach specialist.
There's one more question here. It says that sometimes I do not want to give contest for the fear of my rating going down. Would you like to answer that?
Okay, तो यार होता क्या है ना कि ऐसा नहीं होता कि if you give a contest and your rating goes down, it is permanent. Okay, like I said, there was a question about how do you deal with your down points. There is nothing to actually deal with them. You just have to ignore them, right? So if you're giving a contest, don't think like my rating will decrease or it will increase. Should I give it or not? Should I, should I look at the problems and then decide should I give it or not? Don't do all of that. Just make up your mind before the contest that if I'm giving it, even if I have a negative delta, it does not matter, because in the long run, my overall level is increasing and my rating graph would reach at a certain saturation, which I actually deserve. Okay.
I think there's a question in the chat box. How should we start with the DP?
How should you start with DP? Okay. First of all, you should be familiar with recursion. I mean, I'm assuming that most of you would be familiar with recursion. In case you're not, just pick up any playlist on YouTube or just pick up any long video on YouTube and just be done with it. And after you're familiar with recursion, what you can do is you can pick up this problem set called CSES problem set. Okay, let me just write it here in the chat. Right. So what you can do is you can refer to this problem set called CSES problem set. And while you're solving problems on this problem set, if you're stuck on any problem, you can go to YouTube and search for this YouTube channel called Karthik Arora. And yeah, I think he's covered almost all problems of the CSES problem set, so you wouldn't face any issues in that. And once you're done with CSES problem set, I am not saying that you just go to CSES problem set and solve all the problems of DP. Although there are not many, but if you talk about the later problems, they're very difficult. Okay, so I would recommend completing at least like 70% or 80% of it, and after that, I mean, you should be good to go. And all of these things that I'm saying, they are from a competitive programming point of view. If you talk about specifically preparing for DSAs, I wouldn't recommend doing this. What you can do is you can maybe pick up any sheet, something like Stiver sheet or Love Bubber's DSA sheet, and you can do all the dynamic programming problems from that.
Sir, can you please type the name of the sheets in the chat box?
Yeah, sure.
Hello, is the Stiver sheet and a Love Bubber sheet is enough for cracking the off-campus placement?
Yeah, enough. I mean, again, like I said, it is not just about DSA. It is also about the CS fundamentals like OS DBMS. You also have to do them, right? If you're done with DSA and you're also done with OS DBMS, OOPS, computer networks, it should be fine. Okay, this is a question. Would you like to share your ICPC experience? Okay, what exactly about my ICPC experience?
Like, how was it?
Okay, how was it? It was, I think, it was amazing. First of all, it is totally different from solving problems individually. Like if you talk about all these ICPC rounds, all the problems, they are not at all trivial. Almost all of them are very difficult. And why are they difficult? They don't want you to solve all these problems individually. They want you to solve these problems in a team. So that is why they have a concept of a team in ICPC. So yeah, I think it is a bit difficult compared to your Codeforces rounds or Codechef contests. But since you have a team of 3, you can think through all these questions, right? So what matters? Yeah, go on.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So what matters here is that you might be really good. Like your team would be. You might have a team where you even have grandmasters. But if you don't have very good team coordination, you would not be performing that well. So even if the people in your team are not that high rated, even if they're not that skilled, if you have good teamwork, you should be good to go. Okay, so even while you're selecting a team, don't just select people who are very high rated. Select people with whom you can coordinate well, right?
Okay. Did you do any other preparation than CP for ICPC?
No. If you talk about ICPC, it is all about competitive programming, right? So there is just one thing that you need to do differently here for ICPC, which is that while you're attempting individual contests, you should also attempt contests in teams. So I'm not saying that you go to a Codeforces round and attempt it in a team. That would not be great, and it would actually be cheating. But I would say that you go to this gym on Codeforces and you can encounter all these regional contests and you can attempt them in teams.
Okay, thank you.
Which mathematical things we need to practice for competitive programming? Okay, so if you talk about mathematics, it is all about number theory. Okay, there is number theory, there is probability, and then there is geometry. Okay, so and if you talk about geometry and probability, they're not asked in your initial stages, but number theory is really very important. So for number theory, there is a channel called Code and Code. Let me just write it here. This is a channel on YouTube, and you can refer to that. What is the best time to apply for internships? Okay, I'm assuming that you're talking about off-campus internships. So the thing is that there is no perfect time to apply for internships. Whenever a company has its opening, you can go on their career page and apply. Okay, so there is nothing like a best time. Only when a company will open their opportunities, only then can you actually apply. So in that case, what you need to do is you need to keep looking on LinkedIn, keep looking at YouTube videos that tell you about the certain opportunities, And whenever you look at an opportunity, just apply. That would be the best time. When we get to know that we are ready to apply for internships. Okay, so that's a good question. When do you know that you're actually ready? Okay, so if you talk about knowing when you're ready, you would never be ready. Okay, so there is nothing like being perfect. What happens is that once you're familiar with all these concepts like linked lists, BSTs, graphs, trees, dynamic programming, you're also familiar with OS, DBMS. That is a fine time that, to say that you're ready for an interview. I mean, there is no metric, I would say, to decide whether you're fit for an interview or whether you're fit for actually applying or not. You just need to be familiar with all that is required and just have faith in yourself.
Sometimes we face some problems in contest where it deals with large numbers. So would you recommend a bit of hold in Python that would get us sail through those problems?
No, I would not recommend going for Python. There is a thing called, I'm not sure about the name, but it is, I think, integer 120 bytes in C++ SL. Okay, so that is something that you can refer to. And apart from that, if you talk about Java, there is a thing called big integer, and these are enough. Okay, you don't have to go for Python specifically for handling large numbers. I mean, this is something that I used to do initially when I didn't know about big integer and integers 128 bytes. What I used to do was I used to just put up the whole solution again in Python and submit it. That might work in an initial stage, but it just takes up a lot of time from switching from one language to another.
So the recorded video will be available to us.
I think
yes, it will be. Yes, it will be on our YouTube channel soon after this session gets over.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
And yeah, I think you guys can also join my Discord server if you would like to. Let me, just share the link here.
So I guess there are no more questions. So Priyansh, that was a really great session. I guess all of us learned a lot of new things from you. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, then see ya. Bye. Thank you all for having me here.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Priyansh. It was great having you.